What happens when a warm celebrity interview suddenly shifts into a tense and unforgettable exchange? What happens when a simple question, asked on live television, causes an entire studio to hold its breath? Before we dive into this story, make sure you subscribe to Prime Spotlight, hit the like button, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on celebrity interviews that become unforgettable moments. The bright studio lights of The View reflected across the polished stage as the audience applauded enthusiastically. Cameras glided into position while the familiar opening music faded into the background. At the iconic table sat the four hosts: Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin, and Sara Haines. They exchanged welcoming smiles as the countdown reached its final seconds. 5, 4, 3. The red camera light illuminated. Whoopi smiled toward the audience. "Good morning, everyone." The audience cheered. Joy leaned forward with a grin. "Today we have one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses joining us." Sara nodded enthusiastically. "A true icon of film and storytelling." Sunny added warmly, "Please welcome the wonderful Julia Roberts." The audience rose to its feet as Julia Roberts walked onto the stage. She waved graciously, her signature smile lighting up the room. She greeted each host warmly before taking her seat at the table. "Thank you so much for having me," Julia said with a smile. "We're thrilled you're here," Whoopi replied. For the first several minutes, the conversation flowed easily. The hosts asked Julia about her latest fictional film project, her decades-long career, and the experiences that had shaped her journey in Hollywood. Julia answered thoughtfully, her voice warm and engaging. "I've been fortunate to work with incredible people," she said. "Every project teaches me something new about collaboration and storytelling." The audience applauded. Joy joked, "And somehow you've managed to make it look effortless for all these years." Laughter rippled through the studio. Julia smiled modestly. "I promise you, it has not always felt effortless." The conversation continued comfortably. Sunny asked about Julia's preparation for emotionally demanding roles. Sara asked how she balanced career and family life. Julia answered each question with humor and grace, and the audience responded warmly. Then Joy Behar glanced down at a note card beside her mug. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Julia's smile remained pleasant, though she tilted her head slightly as if sensing the conversation was about to change direction. Joy looked up. "Julia, can I ask you something a little more personal?" Julia smiled politely. "You can ask." The audience chuckled softly. Joy continued. "You've spent so many years in the public eye, and people admire not only your work, but also the image you've maintained throughout your career. Do you ever feel pressure to always appear composed and positive?" The studio grew quieter. Julia considered the question carefully. "I think anyone in the public eye feels pressure at times," she said. "But I've learned that composure doesn't mean pretending to be perfect." Joy nodded. "So you don't feel the need to maintain a perfect image?" Julia answered slowly. "I think the idea of a perfect image is unrealistic. People are complex, and public figures are no exception." Sunny listened attentively. Sara folded her hands on the table. Whoopi watched the exchange with interest. Joy leaned forward slightly. "But audiences often expect celebrities to be polished and inspirational. Does that expectation ever become exhausting?" A murmur moved through the audience. Julia remained composed. "It can be," she admitted, "because there's a difference between being professional and being expected to embody an idealized version of yourself all the time." The audience applauded lightly. Joy smiled politely but continued. "Do you think celebrities contribute to that idealized image by controlling what they share publicly?" Julia paused. The room became still. Finally, she answered. "I think everyone chooses what parts of their life they share publicly," she said. "That's true for celebrities, but it's also true for people outside the public eye." Joy held her gaze. "But when someone has millions of fans, doesn't that choice carry extra weight?" Julia nodded. "It can, but having influence doesn't erase a person's right to boundaries." The audience applauded more strongly. Joy tilted her head. "So you believe celebrities should have the same right to privacy as anyone else?" Julia answered calmly. "Absolutely. Public interest does not automatically create public ownership." A quiet "oh" moved through the audience. Whoopi raised her eyebrows slightly, impressed by the firmness of the response. Sunny glanced toward Sara, who smiled thoughtfully. Joy nodded slowly. "That's a strong statement." Julia smiled gently. "I believe it's an important one." The audience applauded again. Joy continued. Some people might say that fans feel connected to celebrities because they've followed their careers for years. How do you balance that connection with personal boundaries? Julia folded her hands. I think gratitude and boundaries can coexist, she said. I'm deeply grateful for the support people have given me throughout my career. But gratitude doesn't require someone to surrender every aspect of their private life. The audience listened intently. Whoopi nodded. That's a fair point. Joy smiled. I understand what you're saying. Julia continued, her tone still warm but more deliberate. I think the healthiest relationship between a public figure and an audience is one based on appreciation, not entitlement. The audience erupted into applause. Joy laughed softly. Well, that was a very elegant way to put it. Julia smiled. Thank you. For a brief moment, the tension eased. But Joy glanced down at her note card once more. The audience sensed that the conversation was not finished. Joy looked back up. One last question, she said. The studio became quiet again. Julia nodded politely. Go ahead. Joy asked, do you ever worry that setting firm boundaries might make you seem distant to the people who admire you? Julia looked directly at Joy. Her expression remained calm, but her voice carried a quiet firmness. No, Julia said. I believe boundaries are part of a healthy relationship. They don't create distance, they create clarity. The audience gasped softly. Then applause broke out across the studio. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. Sunny nodded. Sara applauded lightly. Joy smiled, acknowledging the strength of the response. The cameras moved in closer as the audience's applause continued. What had begun as a warm interview had become a more emotionally charged and thoughtful conversation about fame, privacy, and the boundaries between public admiration and personal space. And as the applause gradually faded, everyone in the studio could sense that the conversation was only beginning. The applause gradually softened, but the atmosphere in the studio remained charged. What had begun as a warm and respectful interview had shifted into something more thoughtful and emotionally layered. The audience sat quietly, waiting for the next exchange, while the cameras moved carefully across the table to capture every expression. Joy Behar smiled politely, though her eyes remained focused on Julia Roberts. I appreciate your perspective, Joy said, and I think this is why these conversations matter. People are genuinely interested in how celebrities navigate the expectations placed on them. Julia nodded. And I appreciate the question, she replied, because expectations are a very real part of public life. But I also think it's important to remember that admiration should not become a reason to disregard someone's personal boundaries. Sunny Hostin leaned in slightly. That's an important distinction, Sunny said. But do you think celebrities sometimes contribute to the expectation that fans should know more about their personal lives? Julia considered the question carefully. I think public figures make choices about what they share, she said. And those choices can certainly shape how audiences perceive them. But sharing some aspects of your life does not mean you have waived your right to privacy in all aspects. The audience murmured thoughtfully. Sara Haines smiled. I think a lot of people can relate to that, Sara said. Most of us share parts of our lives with friends, coworkers, or social media, but we still expect certain things to remain private. Julia turned toward Sara. Exactly, she said. Boundaries are a normal part of healthy relationships. They help define what is shared and what is protected. The audience applauded softly. Joy leaned back slightly. So when fans feel connected to a celebrity, how should they understand that connection? Joy asked. Julia answered gently. I think it should be understood as appreciation, she said. Fans can feel connected to an actor's work, personality, or public presence. That connection can be meaningful, but it does not necessarily mean they are entitled to access every private detail of that person's life. Whoopi Goldberg nodded thoughtfully. That's a fair point, Whoopi said. People can admire someone deeply without expecting complete access to them. Julia smiled appreciatively. Exactly, she said. Admiration can exist alongside respect for boundaries. The audience applauded again. Joy continued. But some people might say that celebrities benefit from public attention, so there is an implied responsibility to share more of themselves. Julia remained composed. I understand that perspective, she said. Public attention is certainly part of a celebrity's career, but I don't think professional visibility should be confused with personal obligation. There is a difference between sharing your work with the public and surrendering your private life to public scrutiny. A quiet murmur moved through the audience. Sunny looked intrigued. So you believe there is a line between public engagement and personal exposure? Sunny asked. Yes, Julia replied. And I think that line is different for every person. Some public figures choose to share a great deal about their lives. Others choose to keep certain aspects private. Both choices can be valid. The audience listened intently. Sara added, "It sounds like you're saying the important thing is that the choice belongs to the individual." Julia nodded. Exactly, she said. Autonomy is essential. No one should feel pressured to share more than they are comfortable sharing simply because they are in the public eye. Joy smiled. That's a strong argument. Julia smiled back. I think it's a human one. The audience applauded more strongly. Whoopi leaned forward slightly. Julia, let me ask you this, Whoopi said. Have there been moments in your career when you felt that public expectations became overwhelming? Julia paused before answering. Yes, she said. There have been moments when the attention felt intense. And in those moments, I had to remind myself that protecting my personal life was not selfish. It was necessary for my well-being and for the well-being of my family. The audience grew quiet. Joy responded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Family adds another layer to the conversation. It does, Julia said. When children and loved ones are involved, boundaries become even more important. Public interest should never override a person's responsibility to protect the people closest to them. The audience applauded warmly. Sunny nodded. I think many parents can understand that instinct, Sunny said. Julia smiled. I hope so. At the end of the day, celebrities are still people with relationships, responsibilities, and private lives that deserve respect. Joy glanced toward the audience. Joy said, I think this conversation is resonating because it's not just about celebrities. It's about how all of us manage what we share and what we keep private. The audience applauded in agreement. Julia nodded. That's true. In a way, social media has made this conversation relevant to almost everyone. Many people now have to think about what parts of their lives they want to share publicly and what parts they want to protect. Whoopi smiled. That's a very modern reality. Julia agreed. Yes, and it makes boundaries even more important. The ability to choose what you share is part of maintaining a healthy sense of self. Joy looked back at Julia. I can see why you feel strongly about this, Joy said. But do you ever worry that fans might interpret boundaries as rejection? Julia answered calmly. I think clear boundaries can actually create healthier relationships, she said. When expectations are clear, there is less confusion and less room for misunderstanding. Boundaries are not about rejecting people. They are about defining the space in which a relationship can exist respectfully. The audience applauded. Sara smiled. That's a thoughtful way to frame it. Julia continued. I'm grateful for the support people have given me throughout my career. That support has allowed me to do work I love. But gratitude does not require me to give up every part of my private life. The two things can coexist. Joy nodded slowly. I understand what you're saying. Julia's tone remained warm but deliberate. I think the healthiest relationship between a public figure and an audience is one based on appreciation, respect, and clear boundaries. When those elements are present, the connection can be genuine without becoming intrusive. The audience erupted into applause. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. That's a powerful perspective. Sunny added, and a very relevant one. Joy laughed softly. Well, I think you've given us all something to think about. Julia smiled. I hope so. For a brief moment, the tension eased. The conversation had become less about confrontation and more about understanding. The hosts exchanged thoughtful glances, and the audience seemed deeply engaged in the discussion. But Joy glanced down at her note card once more. The audience sensed that the conversation was not finished. Joy looked back up. One more question, she said. The studio became quiet again. Julia nodded politely. Go ahead. Joy asked, do you think there is ever a risk that maintaining firm boundaries can make a celebrity seem less relatable to the public? Julia looked directly at Joy. Her expression remained calm, but her voice carried a quiet firmness. I think relatability comes from authenticity, Julia said. And authenticity does not require someone to share every private detail of their life. In fact, being honest about the need for boundaries can make a person more relatable, because everyone needs boundaries in some form. The audience gasped softly. Then applause broke out across the studio. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. Sunny nodded. Sara applauded lightly. Joy smiled, acknowledging the strength of the response. The cameras moved in closer as the audience's applause continued. What had begun as a warm interview had become a more emotionally charged and thoughtful conversation about fame, privacy, and the boundaries between public admiration and personal space. And as the applause gradually faded, everyone in the studio could sense that the conversation was only deepening. The applause slowly faded, leaving behind a charged stillness that seemed to settle over the studio. The conversation had evolved from a lighthearted celebrity interview into a thoughtful exploration of fame, privacy, and the expectations placed on public figures. Every person at the table appeared aware that the discussion had reached a deeper level. Whoopi Goldberg glanced around the table before speaking. "I think what makes this conversation so compelling," Whoopi said, "is that it touches on something many people struggle with: how to maintain authenticity while also protecting their personal boundaries." Julia Roberts nodded. "That's exactly the challenge," she replied. "Authenticity does not mean sharing everything. It means being honest about who you are and what you choose to keep private." Sunny Hostin leaned in slightly. "But do you think audiences sometimes confuse privacy with secrecy?" Sunny asked. Julia considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said. "I think that can happen. Privacy is often misunderstood as withholding or hiding something. But privacy is simply the choice to keep certain aspects of your life personal. It does not mean there is something deceptive about that choice." The audience murmured thoughtfully. Sara Haines smiled. "That's an important distinction," Sara said. "Most people would not want every detail of their lives made public, so it makes sense that celebrities would feel the same way." Julia turned toward Sara. "Exactly," she said. "Fame changes the scale of public attention, but it does not change the basic human need for personal space." Joy Behar nodded slowly. "I can see that," Joy said. "But I also think fans often feel emotionally invested in the lives of celebrities they've admired for years." Julia responded gently. "And that investment can be very meaningful," she said. "I'm grateful when people connect with my work or feel inspired by a film. But I think it's important to distinguish between connecting with someone's work and expecting access to their private life." The audience applauded softly. Whoopi added, "That's a healthy distinction. Admiration does not automatically create entitlement." Julia smiled appreciatively. "Exactly," she said. "A healthy relationship between a public figure and an audience is based on appreciation, respect, and understanding." Joy looked thoughtful. "Do you think social media has made this issue more complicated?" Joy asked. Julia nodded. "Very much so," she said. "Social media has created a culture where people are often encouraged to share constantly. That can make boundaries seem unusual or even suspicious, when in reality they are essential for emotional well-being." The audience listened intently. Sunny added, "It can also create pressure for public figures to appear accessible all the time." "Yes," Julia replied, "and accessibility can be valuable. But there is a difference between being accessible in a professional sense and being expected to make every part of your life available for public consumption." The audience applauded again. Sara said, "It sounds like you're describing a balance between connection and protection." Julia nodded. "That's exactly what it is," she said. "Connection is important. I value the relationship I have with audiences. But protection is also important because without boundaries, a person can lose the ability to maintain a stable private life." Whoopi looked at Julia with interest. "Have your boundaries changed over the course of your career?" Whoopi asked. Julia paused before answering. "Yes," she said. "When I was younger, I was still learning how to navigate public attention. Over time, I realized that boundaries were not barriers to connection. They were tools for maintaining balance." The audience grew quiet. Joy asked another question. "What helped you come to that realization?" Julia smiled softly. "Life experience," she said, "and becoming more aware of what mattered most to me. Career success is important, but so are family, friendships, and the ability to have moments that are not defined by public attention." The audience applauded warmly. Sunny nodded. "That makes sense. It sounds like your priorities became clearer over time." "They did," Julia said. "And I think that happens to many people. As we grow, we become more intentional about where we place our energy and what we choose to protect." Joy looked toward the audience. Joy said, "I think this conversation is resonating because it applies to more than just celebrities. Many people are trying to figure out how much of themselves they want to share publicly." The audience applauded in agreement. Julia nodded. "That's true. In a way, social media has made this conversation relevant to almost everyone. Many people now have to think about what parts of their lives they want to share and what parts they want to keep private. Whoopi smiled. That's a very modern reality. Julia agreed. Yes, and it makes boundaries even more important. The ability to choose what you share is part of maintaining a healthy sense of self. Joy looked back at Julia. I can see why you feel strongly about this, Joy said. But do you ever worry that fans might interpret boundaries as rejection? Julia answered calmly. I think clear boundaries can actually create healthier relationships, she said. When expectations are clear, there is less confusion and less room for misunderstanding. Boundaries are not about rejecting people. They are about defining the space in which a relationship can exist respectfully. The audience applauded. Sara smiled. That's a thoughtful way to frame it. Julia continued. I'm grateful for the support people have given me throughout my career. That support has allowed me to do work I love. But gratitude does not require me to give up every part of my private life. The two things can coexist. Joy nodded slowly. I understand what you're saying. Julia's tone remained warm but deliberate. I think the healthiest relationship between a public figure and an audience is one based on appreciation, respect, and clear boundaries. When those elements are present, the connection can be genuine without becoming intrusive. The audience erupted into applause. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. That's a powerful perspective. Sunny added, and a very relevant one. Joy laughed softly. Well, I think you've given us all something to think about. Julia smiled. I hope so. For a brief moment, the tension eased. The conversation had become less about confrontation and more about understanding. The hosts exchanged thoughtful glances, and the audience seemed deeply engaged in the discussion. But Joy glanced down at her note card once more. The audience sensed that the conversation was not finished. Joy looked back up. One more question, she said. The studio became quiet again. Julia nodded politely. Go ahead. Joy asked, do you think there is ever a risk that maintaining firm boundaries can make a celebrity seem less relatable to the public? Julia looked directly at Joy. Her expression remained calm, but her voice carried a quiet firmness. I think relatability comes from authenticity, Julia said. And authenticity does not require someone to share every private detail of their life. In fact, being honest about the need for boundaries can make a person more relatable, because everyone needs boundaries in some form. The audience gasped softly. Then applause broke out across the studio. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. Sunny nodded. Sara applauded lightly. Joy smiled, acknowledging the strength of the response. The cameras moved in closer as the audience's applause continued. What had begun as a warm interview had become a more emotionally charged and thoughtful conversation about fame, privacy, and the boundaries between public admiration and personal space. And as the applause gradually faded, everyone in the studio could sense that the conversation was only deepening. The applause gradually softened, but the energy in the studio remained unmistakably electric. The conversation had traveled far beyond the boundaries of a routine celebrity interview. It had become a thoughtful exchange about fame, privacy, boundaries, and the expectations placed on public figures. Whoopi Goldberg looked around the table with a warm smile. I think this has been one of the most meaningful conversations we've had in a long time, Whoopi said. Not because everyone agreed on every point, but because everyone listened. The audience applauded. Julia Roberts nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Julia replied. I think listening is often the most important part of any conversation, especially when the topic is personal and complex. Sunny Hostin smiled. And I think your perspective on boundaries has resonated with a lot of people. Sara Haines added, it certainly resonated with me. I think many viewers can relate to the challenge of balancing openness with the need for privacy. Joy Behar grinned. And if they can't relate to that, they can probably relate to wanting to keep at least one part of their life to themselves. Laughter rippled through the studio, easing the intensity of the moment. Julia laughed softly. That may be the most universal point we've made today. The audience laughed and applauded again. Whoopi turned back to Julia. I appreciate that you were willing to engage with these questions, Whoopi said. Sometimes the most valuable conversations are the ones that require a little discomfort. Julia nodded. I agree. Discomfort can be productive when it leads to deeper understanding. Sunny leaned in slightly. And I think what made this conversation powerful was that it stayed respectful, even when the questions became challenging. Julia smiled. Respect is essential. Without it, conversation turns into performance. The audience murmured thoughtfully. Whoopi nodded. That's a strong statement. Julia continued. I think public dialogue is healthiest when people feel safe enough to express their perspective, ask questions, and explain their boundaries without being immediately judged for them. The audience applauded warmly. Sara smiled. That's a hopeful perspective. Joy added with a grin. And a difficult one for social media. Laughter spread through the studio. Whoopi chuckled. That's true. Julia laughed. Very true. As the laughter faded, Whoopi became more reflective. Julia, before we wrap up, I want to ask one final question, Whoopi said. After a conversation like this, what do you hope viewers take away from it? The studio grew quiet once more. Julia paused, choosing her words carefully. I hope viewers take away the idea that boundaries are not barriers to connection, she said. They are part of what makes healthy relationships possible. Whether you are a public figure or not, you have the right to decide what parts of your life you share and what parts you keep private. The audience applauded. Julia continued. I also hope people remember that admiration and respect can coexist. You can appreciate someone's work, support their career, and feel connected to their art without expecting complete access to their personal life. Whoopi nodded. That's a valuable reminder. Sunny added. And I think it's especially relevant in a world where so much of our lives can be shared publicly. Julia agreed. Yes, we live in a time when sharing has become very common, but that makes intentional boundaries even more important. The ability to choose what you share is part of maintaining a healthy sense of self. The audience applauded again. Joy smiled. Well, I think you've given us all something to think about. Julia smiled back. I hope so. Sara turned toward Julia. Thank you for sharing your perspective so thoughtfully, Sara said. Thank you for having me, Julia replied. I've appreciated the conversation. Whoopi smiled. And we've appreciated having you here. The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation. The cameras captured the hosts smiling, Julia waving graciously, and the audience applauding with genuine enthusiasm. As the show moved toward its closing moments, the producers in the control room exchanged impressed glances. That was something special, one producer whispered. Another nodded. It was intense, but in the best possible way. Within this fictional scenario, clips of the conversation quickly began circulating online. Viewers shared excerpts of Julia's comments about boundaries, authenticity, and the importance of respecting personal space. Some praised Joy Behar for asking thoughtful questions that pushed the conversation deeper. Others applauded Julia Roberts for responding with calmness, clarity, and emotional intelligence. Many viewers highlighted the respectful contributions of Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin, and Sara Haines, noting how each host helped shape the conversation without allowing it to become hostile. Entertainment commentators within this fictional story described the interview as a rare example of a televised discussion that remained compelling without relying on shouting or sensationalism. Social media users debated the central question of the conversation. How much access should audiences expect from public figures? Some viewers agreed with Julia's emphasis on boundaries and personal autonomy. Others argued that celebrities, because of their visibility, inevitably invite a certain level of public curiosity. But many agreed on one thing. The conversation had encouraged people to think more deeply about how they balance admiration with respect. Days later, fans were still discussing Julia's line. Boundaries don't create distance, they create clarity. The phrase became a widely shared quote within this fictional narrative, appearing in posts, comments, and discussions about privacy, relationships, and public life. Back in the studio, as the applause faded and the cameras prepared to cut away, Joy looked at Julia one last time. Thank you for this conversation, Joy said sincerely. Julia smiled warmly. Thank you for asking the questions. The audience applauded once more as the closing music began to play. The screen slowly faded to black. And then one final message appeared for viewers. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the conversation between Julia Roberts and Joy Behar in this scenario? Share your opinion in the comments below, and let us know which moment stood out to you the most. And if you want more celebrity stories, dramatic moments, and entertaining narratives, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Prime Spotlight, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.